The heat hit like a physical thing the moment Jackson Cross stepped out of the air-conditioned clubhouse back room, 114 degrees at 2:45 on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of Phoenix summer that turned asphalt into black mirrors and made breathing feel like work. The oscillating fan mounted on the corrugated steel wall pushed thick air in lazy circles, doing nothing except redistributing the misery. Jackson settled into his usual chair, the cracked leather armchair positioned with clear sightlines to both exits. Force of habit, 53 years since Vietnam, and he still couldn't sit with his back to a door. The M1911 lay disassembled on the folding table beside him, each component arranged with the geometric precision they drilled into him at Camp Pendleton in 1970. Cleaning his sidearm every Tuesday, same time, same place. Some men went to church. Jackson maintained his weapon. Four other members sprawled across mismatched furniture, scavenged from a dozen yard sales. Cole Mason, the chapter president, occupied the throne, a reinforced recliner that groaned under his 260 frame. At 52, Cole moved like a man who'd spent 20 years jumping out of helicopters and had the rebuilt knee to prove it. Miguel Santos, 35, in lean as a whip, tilted a Tecate to his lips while watching a Diamondbacks game on the television, older than most of the motorcycles parked outside. Tyler Reed, barely 29, fresh ink still bright on his forearms, cleaned his fingernails with a pocket knife. The fourth man, a prospect whose road name Jackson couldn't remember, dozed in the corner. The Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial outskirts of South Phoenix, where the city gave way to desert scrubland, and the only neighbors were a transmission shop and a place that sold discounted tile. No foot traffic, no complaints about noise, perfect anonymity for men who preferred shadows to spotlights. Jackson reassembled the slide mechanism, his fingers remembering the sequence his conscious mind had forgotten. Muscle memory from a different century. Saigon, 1971. Standing watch at Firebase Bastonia while monsoon rain hammered the sandbags. A child appearing out of the darkness, maybe 6 years old, covered in blood that mixed with the water streaming down her face. The VC had used her family for target practice, left her alive as psychological warfare. Jackson, 19 years old and powerless to do anything except call for a medic who arrived too late. He'd carried her small body to the collection point, her weight no more than a rifle, and spent the next 48 hours wondering if mercy would have been quicker than hope. The sound came first. Small footsteps on concrete, irregular dragging. The pattern wrong. Jackson's hand moved toward his hip before his eyes found the source, the phantom weight of a holster he hadn't worn legally in decades. A girl stood in the doorway, 8 years old, maybe 9. Blonde hair matted in tangles around a face smudged with dirt and something darker. Pink t-shirt torn at the collar, the fabric hanging loose where it should have been tucked. Denim shorts held up by a belt cinched to the last hole, sizes too big. But the legs made Jackson's throat close. Bruises layered purple and yellow and green watercolors painted by violence. Fresh ones dark as storm clouds, older ones fading to sick chartreuse. Bare feet left small red prints on the oil-stained floor. The clubhouse went silent. Miguel's beer bottle stopped halfway to his mouth. Tyler's knife clattered to the table. Cole's recliner squeaked as 260 pounds shifted forward. Even the prospect woke up, eyes going wide. The girl didn't run, didn't cry. Just stood there swaying, brown eyes scanning the room with the flat affect of someone who'd seen too much and felt too little. Her gaze found Jackson and held. For reasons beyond tactical analysis, she started walking toward him. Each step deliberate and painful, favoring her left leg. Jackson stood slowly, joints popping like distant rifle shots. His bad knee, the one that still carried shrapnel from a mortar round at Quezon, protested, but he kept moving. Closed the distance in 6 strides and dropped to one knee, bringing his scarred face level with hers. The girl flinched at the sound his kneecap made hitting the concrete, but didn't retreat. He showed her his hands. Palms up, fingers spread. The universal gesture learned in a dozen villages where American GIs were either saviors or executioners depending on who you asked. Unarmed, no threat here. The girl's eyes cataloged his face. The scar running temple to jaw, souvenir from a prison fight in Florence 15 years back. The crow's feet etched deep from decades squinting into bright places. The gray stubble he shaved every 3rd day. The exhaustion that lived in a man who'd survived too many years that should have killed him. Her small voice cracked the silence like a bullet through glass. I can't close my legs. My daddy hurts me. Behind him, Miguel's bottle shattered on the floor. Tyler swore softly. Cole's breathing changed, going shallow and fast. The prospect made a sound like he'd been gut shot. Jackson's jaw locked. The same expression that had crossed his face the split second before he'd killed 3 NVA regulars in a tunnel complex near Da Nang. Before he'd beaten a child molester half to death in the prison yard at Florence, earning himself 6 months in the hole and a reputation that kept predators at arm's length for the rest of his sentence. Show me. The girl lifted her shirt. Cigarette burns dotted her ribs in a pattern too precise to be accidental. Deliberate, methodical. Someone had taken their time. She turned her arms, bruises in the shape of adult handprints, fingers wrapped around thin biceps, squeezing hard enough to leave purple signatures days later. My fingers, she whispered, holding up her right hand. 2 fingers bent at odd angles, healed crooked, because no one had set the brakes. He broke them when I tried to stop him. Jackson felt something crack behind his sternum. Not his heart, that particular organ had calcified decades ago, but something deeper. The thing that had kept him breathing through 3 tours, 8 years in prison, 30 years as an outlaw. The thing that told him there were still lines you didn't cross, still innocence worth protecting, still reasons to keep standing when every rational cell screamed to stay down. Miguel, lock that door. The command came out, parade ground sharp. Miguel moved without question, crossing the clubhouse in 4 strides and throwing the deadbolt. Tyler, first aid kit from my locker. Clean water. Tyler nodded once and disappeared toward the back room. Cole, make the call. The chapter president's eyes widened a fraction. Making the call meant police. Police meant violations of the first law, the code carved into a steel plaque mounted on the wall behind the bar. Never cooperate with law enforcement. The code they'd all sworn blood oaths to uphold. The code that had kept them free when lesser men rolled over for reduced sentences. The girl looked up at Jackson, studying his face with the intensity of a forward observer, calling in artillery. Are you going to hurt me too? No, ma'am. Those days are over for you. You have my word. He met her eyes and held them the way Master Sergeant Kowalski had held his eyes on the day Jackson earned his Eagle Globe and Anchor. The way you looked at someone when making a promise that meant something. When a Marine gives his word, Kowalski had said he keeps it, even if it costs him everything. The girl's shoulders dropped half an inch. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd knocked on the right door. Tyler returned with a green canvas bag marked with a faded red cross in a canteen that had seen better decades. Jackson cleaned her wounds with movements gentle enough for handling porcelain, but sure enough to convey competence. Field medicine learned in places where the nearest aid station was a helicopter ride away, and helicopters drew fire. The girl barely flinched. Were you a soldier, Marine? Long time ago. Did you kill people? Jackson didn't hesitate, didn't soften it with euphemisms or justifications. Yes, bad people who hurt others. That's what Marines do. The girl absorbed this information, processing it against some internal calculus. Can you teach me later? When you're older. Right now we're getting you safe. Miguel draped a wool blanket over her thin shoulders. Army surplus OD green, the kind Jackson had slept under, in 100 temporary hooches scattered across Icor. It smelled like gun oil and Old Spice and decades of hard living. The girl wrapped it tight around herself, despite the 114 heat. Cole stood by the bar, the clubhouse landline pressed to his ear. The phone was a rotary model older than Tyler, connected to a line listed under a shell corporation 3 layers deep. Paid in cash every month, untraceable except to people with warrants and subpoena power. What's your emergency child abuse case? Severe. Needs CPS and police at Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse, 2847 Industrial Way. Silence on the other end. Then the operator's voice pitched higher with something between disbelief and alarm. Sir, did you say Iron Brotherhood? The motorcycle club. Yes, ma'am. Child showed up here seeking help. She's been tortured, multiple injuries. Send help now. This is not a joke. Cole's voice carried parade ground authority, the tone that had commanded a Marine Corps rifle company during Desert Storm. The operator heard it and responded to it the way civilians always did when faced with the certainty of a man who'd given orders under fire. Units are en route. Stay on the line. Cole hung up anyway. The Iron Brotherhood didn't stay on lines. The Iron Brotherhood ended conversations on their terms. Miguel's jaw worked like he was chewing words too big to swallow. His voice came out tight. Cole, you realize what this means. We call cops, we're finished. National will revoke our charter. Tyler leaned against the bar, knuckles white around his knife handle. We got outstanding warrants. Ramirez has that bench warrant from Tucson. Snake's on parole. Cops show up, half the club goes down. Jackson stood, the girl's small hand finding his scarred one without prompting. The trust in that gesture hit harder than any punch he'd taken in the ring or the yard. Then half the club goes down. I didn't survive Quezon to watch a child die in Phoenix. The words hung in the thick air. Outside traffic hummed on Interstate 10. Inside, four men faced the kind of choice that defined whether you were just an outlaw or whether you stood for something beyond the patch on your back. Cole studied Jackson for a long moment. 43 years they'd known each other since Cole was a punk lieutenant fresh from Quantico, and Jackson was a sergeant who'd already seen enough to fill 3 lifetimes. They'd pulled each other out of more than one firefight, literal and metaphorical. Cole had been Jackson's cellmate in Florence for 2 years, had stood beside him during the riot in Cell Block D when the Aryan Brotherhood decided they wanted Iron Brotherhood territory. The chapter president's voice dropped to the tone he'd used when telling his platoon they were inserting into Fallujah during the worst of the insurgency. Everyone understand what Ghost is saying. We make this call, there's no going back. Code gets broken, National comes down hard. Some of you might see the inside of county lockup. He looked at each man in turn. Miguel, Tyler, the prospect whose name Jackson still didn't know. All in favor of violating code, raise your right hand. Jackson's hand went up first, Cole's second, Miguel's third after only a heartbeat's hesitation. Tyler stared at his boots for 5 seconds that stretched like hours, then his hand joined the others. The prospect's hand stayed down. Smart kid. He'd only been patched in 3 months ago, didn't owe the same blood debt the others had accumulated over decades. Cole's voice cut like a command detonating. The code is broken for the right reason, Semper Fi. The response came in unison, automatic, drilled so deep it bypassed conscious thought. Semper Fi. The girl looked up at Jackson, confusion flickering across her flat expression. What's that mean, always faithful? It's what Marines say to each other. Means we never leave anyone behind, no matter what. Even me, especially you. 23 minutes passed. The fans circulated hot air. The Diamondbacks game played on, commentators discussing pitch counts and earned run averages like the world wasn't breaking apart 6 feet from the television. Miguel swept up the broken glass from his drop bottle. Tyler arranged the first aid supplies back in the canvas bag with movements too precise, the kind of busy work that kept hands occupied and minds from fracturing. The prospect slipped out the back door and didn't return. Smart kid. The girl sat in Jackson's chair, the wool blanket pulled tight despite the heat. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared at the far wall where the code hung in its steel frame, 3 rules that had governed this clubhouse for 20 years. Rules that 4 men had just shattered because sometimes rules mattered less than righteousness. Jackson cleaned his M1911 for the 2nd time that day. The ritual calmed him the way meditation probably calmed other people, the way whiskey used to before he'd poured his last bottle down the drain in 2003 and never looked back. Take apart, clean, reassemble. The tangible proof that some things could be broken down and made whole again. The girl watched his hands move through the sequence. Can you really teach me to shoot? When you're older, when you're shy, guns aren't toys, they're tools. You only pick them up when someone needs protecting. My daddy says guns are for real men, not bad girls like me. Jackson's hand stopped mid-motion. The slide mechanism hung frozen between disassembly and reconstruction. His voice came out flatter than he'd intended, but the girl needed to hear it without cushioning. Your daddy's wrong about everything. You understand everything he told you is a lie. How do you know? Because I've met 1,000 men like him. They all say the same things, and they're all wrong. The sirens announced themselves at 4:23, wailing up Industrial Way with the urgency reserved for child welfare calls. Ambulance first, 2 EMTs bursting through the door with tackle boxes full of medical supplies and expressions that went from professional concern to barely contained horror in the span of 3 seconds. The female EMT, 40-something, with kind eyes and hands that had seen every variety of human damage, dropped to one knee beside the chair. Her voice came out soft but firm, the tone you'd use approaching a spooked horse. "Sweetie, I'm Rachel. I'm a nurse. Can I check your injuries?" The girl looked at Jackson. "Is she safe?" "She's safe. She's here to help." Rachel's examination took 8 minutes. Her partner, a kid maybe 25, who looked like he'd started this shift thinking it would be routine, had to step outside twice. The second time, he didn't come back for 5 minutes. Tyler followed him out, came back alone, face grim, kids throwing up behind the dumpster. First pediatric abuse case. Rachel stood, her professional mask slipping just enough to show the fury underneath. She pulled out her phone and made a call without asking permission. "This is Unit 12. We need transport to Phoenix Children's. Multiple traumatic injuries consistent with severe prolonged abuse. Patient is an 8-year-old female. Possible sexual assault. We need a trauma surgeon standing by." The police arrived 8 minutes after the ambulance. Two patrol officers, one pushing 50, and skeptical of everything the other younger and professional, in the way academy grads are before the job beats it out of them. Then the unmarked sedan, dark blue Crown Victoria with government plates, and Jackson knew what was coming before the door opened. Detective Frank Reeves stepped into the club house, carrying 20 years of weariness and a service weapon he kept his hand deliberately away from. 45 years old, black, built like a linebacker who'd stayed in shape after retirement. His eyes swept the room in tactical assessment mode, exits, threats, innocent bystanders, and landed on Jackson with the weight of recognition. The detective's expression shifted through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been respect, before settling on professional neutrality. Jackson Cross, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Jackson stood at something resembling parade rest habits ingrained too deep to shake. Frank Reeves, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Quezon. The moment stretched. Two men who'd been 19 and terrified in different corners of the same war, who'd come home to different cities in different lives but carried the same weight. Cole straightened, reading the dynamic instantly. "Stand down. He's one of us." The skeptical patrol officer's hand moved away from his weapon. The younger one looked confused but followed his partner's lead. Rachel continued prepping the girl for transport, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction. Reeves approached Jackson with the measured steps of a man who'd been shot at enough times to never move carelessly. His voice dropped below the range where the patrol officers could hear. "Talk to me straight, Marine." Child appeared 1447 hours. Multiple injuries consistent with prolonged torture and sexual assault. Perpetrator identified as father. Made the call 1520 hours. "You know what this does to your club?" Affirmative. "Doesn't change what needed to be done." Reeves studied Jackson's face, reading the topography of scars and decades and hard choices. "You broke your code. I've broken a lot of codes, but I won't break the code that says protect children." The detective's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes, some memory surfacing against his will. Quezon, January 68, Hill, 861. "You took shrapnel covering my squad's retreat when the NVA overran the wire. Carried Corporal Matthews 70 meters while taking fire." "I never forgot." Jackson remembered. Remembered the mortars walking across the hilltop. Remembered Matthews screaming, with both legs gone below the knee. Remembered his own back exploding into white pain as shrapnel punched through flak jacket and flesh. Remembered stumbling into the aid station and collapsing, waking up 3 days later in a hospital ship off Da Nang. "Then help this girl. That's how you pay the debt." Reeves pulled out a notepad, flipped it open with practiced efficiency. "I need a statement. And I need you to understand that what happens next won't be pretty. For her or for your club." The girl's voice cut through, thin and fragile, but steady. Detective Reeves crossed to her with the careful movements of someone approaching something breakable. He knelt, bringing his face level with hers. "I'm Detective Reeves, sweetheart. I'm here to help. Can you tell me who hurt you, David Hayes?" "My daddy, building, apartment 14, Sunsetted Terrace Apartments." "How long has this been happening?" "Since Mommy died. 3 years and 4 months. The precision of that measurement, the way she'd counted every day of hell, made Reeves's professional mask crack. He recovered fast, but Jackson saw it. Every man in the room saw it. "Did you tell anyone, teachers, neighbors, Mrs. Rodriguez next door?" "She saw my bruises at the mailbox. I asked her to call someone. She said it wasn't her business." Systemic failure laid bare in 10 words. The detective's hand trembled slightly as he wrote, but his voice stayed level. You were very brave coming here, and very smart. These men did the right thing calling us. The girl looked at Jackson again, and he read the question before she asked it. Will he find me? Not while I'm breathing. And Marines don't die easy. Will you come to the hospital? I'll be there. You have my word. And a Marine's word is sacred. Reeves watched the exchange with the intensity of a detective building a case and a veteran recognizing something he'd seen in jungle villages a lifetime ago. The bond between protector and protected. The kind that didn't require blood relation or legal documentation. The kind written in action, not words. Rachel approached with a stretcher, her partner having recovered enough composure to assist. They lifted the girl with movements choreographed by years of emergency response efficiency married to gentleness. She weighed nothing, 60 pounds soaking wet, maybe less. Jackson had carried heavier rucksacks through triple canopy jungle. The girl's hand found his one more time before they loaded her into the ambulance. Promise, promise. The ambulance pulled away at 4:51, sirens wailing into the Phoenix afternoon. Jackson watched it disappear around the corner onto Industrial Way, headed toward Phoenix Children's Hospital, and a team of doctors who document every cigarette burn, every broken bone, every violation in clinical terminology that couldn't capture the reality of what this girl had survived. Reeves stood beside him, notepad still open. Mr. Cross, I'm going to need a full statement, and I have questions about how an 8-year-old knew to come to this location. She didn't know us, she just knew she needed help. Somehow I doubt that's the whole story. The detective's words carried no accusation, just the weariness of a man who'd heard every lie and half-truth the human mind could construct. It's the whole story that matters. Rest is noise. Reeves flipped his notepad closed, slid it into his jacket pocket. We're executing a warrant on David Hayes right now. Tactical team full breach. If what this girl says is true and based on her injuries, I believe every word. He's looking at life without parole. Not long enough. Miguel's voice came from behind them, flat and cold. The detective turned, studied the younger man with the kind of assessment that cataloged threat levels and tactical considerations. I didn't hear that, and you didn't say it. He pulled a business card from his wallet, held it out to Jackson. You think of anything else, call me. And Mr. Cross, don't leave town. I'm sure I'll have more questions. The unmarked Crown Victoria pulled away, followed by the 2 patrol units. Their sirens didn't activate, no urgency now that the victim was secure. Just 2 cops heading back to patrol and a detective heading toward a domestic call that would turn into a multi-year prosecution. Cole locked the clubhouse door behind them, threw the deadbolt, and stood there breathing hard. Not from exertion. From the adrenaline dump that came after making choices that couldn't be unmade. Tyler paced the length of the building, hands opening and closing like he wanted to hit something, but couldn't identify a worthy target. Miguel sat on the bar, Tecate forgotten, staring at nothing. The prospect's empty chair, a reminder that some men chose patches over principles. Jackson reassembled his M1911 for the 3rd time that day. Slide barrel spring frame. The pieces fitting together in the only order that made sense, following a design that hadn't changed since 1911 because some things worked and didn't need improving. Cole's voice cut through the silence. National's going to crucify us. You know that Jackson chambered an imaginary round, checked the action, safed the weapon. Worth it. Yeah. Reaper tugged at his beard, the gray showing more than it had this morning. Yeah, it was. Outside, Phoenix baked under a sun that didn't care about human drama. Inside, 4 outlaws sat with the wreckage of everything they'd built over 20 years, scattered around them like shrapnel. The code broken. The brotherhood exposed. The future uncertain. And a little girl headed towards surgery that might save her body, while the real question whether her mind could be saved hung unanswered in the superheated air. Jackson stood, holstered the empty M1911 in the leather rig he kept in his locker, shrugged into his vest despite the heat. The Iron Brotherhood patch on his back had been his identity for 2 decades, earned through blood and loyalty, and 3 years prospecting before they'd voted him in. The eagle globe and anchor tattooed over his heart had been his identity, longer earned in places where the enemy wore black pajamas and the jungle tried to kill you as hard as the bullets. I'm going to the hospital. Cole nodded. I'll come with you. She needs to see friendly faces. And if we're burning the club down, might as well burn it together. Miguel grabbed his keys. 3 bikes then. Reaper, Ghost, Wrench. The old guard. Tyler looked up from his pacing. What about me? You stay. Someone needs to man the fort. And you still have clean paper. If this goes sideways, club needs members who can walk free. The younger man's face tightened, but he nodded. Discipline. Following orders even when every instinct screamed to join the fight. That was club. That was brotherhood. That was what separated them from the gangbangers who thought patches and colors meant license to chaos. Jackson fired up his Harley, the engine catching with a rumble that vibrated through his bad knee and up into the shrapnel still lodged near his spine. The doctors had said they could take it out back in '71, but the surgery carried risks, and Jackson had decided he'd rather carry metal than risk paralysis. 48 years later, he felt every fragment when the weather changed or the bike vibrated just right. The ride to Phoenix Children's took 23 minutes, 3 men in leather cutting through traffic with the efficiency of a tactical convoy. Phoenix drivers gave them space. The Iron Brotherhood patch commanded respect or fear, depending on who was looking, and Jackson didn't care which. Results mattered. Perception was for politicians and people who had something to prove. The hospital rose 7 stories glass and steel, and the aggressive optimism of modern architecture trying to make sickness and trauma look manageable. The emergency entrance sprouted ambulances like mushrooms after rain, paramedics hustling gurneys, family members rushing in with that specific terror of people racing toward bad news. Jackson parked in a spot marked motorcycles only, which felt like either cruel irony or divine intervention. Cole and Miguel flanked him as they walked through automatic doors into air conditioning turned aggressive enough to make the transition from outside feel like stepping into a meat locker. The elderly receptionist looked up from her computer eyes going wide as 3 bikers in full colors approached her desk. Her hand moved towards something under the counter, panic button, probably then stopped when Jackson spoke. We're here for the little girl. Emma Hayes. Came in by ambulance about an hour ago. Abuse case. Recognition dawned on the receptionist's face, fear transforming into something softer. You're the ones who called it in. The news is already reporting it. They arrested the father. What room? 3rd floor. Pediatric trauma wing. But she's in surgery right now. Might be hours. We'll wait. The waiting area on the 3rd floor had been designed by someone who'd never actually waited for bad news. Plastic chairs and colors meant to be cheerful magazines from 3 years ago, a television playing a cooking show with the sound muted. 2 other families occupied opposite corners, carefully not looking at each other or at the 3 men in leather who'd just walked in. Jackson chose a chair with clear sight lines to the elevator and the stairwell. Cole took the seat that covered the opposite approach. Miguel positioned himself where he could watch both exits. Tactical spacing. Force of habit. You didn't survive what they'd survived by sitting with your back exposed. The minutes crawled. The cooking show gave way to the news, and Jackson watched the closed captions scroll across the bottom of the screen. Breaking story. Child abuse case. Girl seeks refuge with motorcycle club. Suspect in custody. The usual media machinery grinding human tragedy into digestible segments between pharmaceutical commercials. His phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize but knew anyway. Alicia Grant, the county prosecutor he'd met once at a veterans function. 3 words. I'll handle this. Jackson pocketed the phone. Grant had a reputation. Former JAG officer prosecuted war criminals at The Hague before coming back to Arizona and working her way up through the DA's office. If she was taking the case personally, David Hayes was done. Not just convicted, buried so deep in the system, he'd die in a cell measuring 6 by 8. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Jackson felt hollow. Emma Hayes would get justice maybe, but justice didn't erase 3 years of torture. Didn't give her back the childhood that had been beaten and burned out of her. Didn't undo the damage to synapses and survival responses and the basic ability to trust that humans could be safe. The elevator chimed. Detective Reeves stepped out still, wearing the same jacket, same expression of a man who'd seen the worst and was still somehow surprised humans could sink lower. He spotted Jackson and walked over. Found him passed out drunk. Apartment was a nightmare. No food, trash everywhere. Holes in the walls where he'd punched through drywall. Found evidence in the closet. His voice dropped pitched so only the 3 bikers could hear. Polaroids, dozens of them. Going back 2 years. He was selling them online. Made $15,000 off his own daughter. Miguel stood up and walked out. Jackson heard him retching in the hallway bathroom 30 seconds later. Cole's hands gripped the plastic armrests hard enough to make them creak. Jackson's voice came out flat, drained of inflection. He in protective custody county lockup. General population until arraignment tomorrow. Judge will decide then. Reeves met Jackson's eyes. An understanding passed between them, veteran to veteran. Protective custody meant isolation. General population meant inmates who had their own code, who handled child abusers the way soldiers handled traitors. Quick, brutal, and final. How's the girl's surgery? Doctor said 3 hours minimum. Internal damage was extensive. But she'll physically survive. Physically. Yeah. The detective sat down 2 chairs over maintaining the spacing of men who understood personal space as tactical consideration. Physically. The hours ground past. The cooking show cycled to game shows to news again. The other families came and went, their emergencies resolved one way or another. A doctor emerged at one point to deliver good news to a young couple, their relief palpable enough to feel across the waiting room. Jackson watched them celebrate survival and thought about how relative that word was. Miguel returned, face pale, eyes red. He didn't speak, just took his position, covering the stairwell again. At 11:47, a surgeon emerged. Dr. Lisa Park, according to her name tag. 40-something Korean-American with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 hours repairing what shouldn't need repair. Family of Emma Hayes Jackson stood. We're what she has. Dr. Park studied them for a long moment. 3 men in leather and denim, one covered in prison tattoos, one with a prosthetic leg visible below his jeans, one young enough to be her son. She made a decision. Surgery was successful. We've repaired the immediate damage. She's stable. But understand the trauma was severe and prolonged. She'll need multiple follow-up procedures and extensive psychological care. Can we see her? She's asking for the Marine. I assume that's one of you. Jackson nodded. ICU, room 312, 10 minutes. That's all I can allow. The ICU smelled like antiseptic and beeping machines and the kind of artificial cleanliness that tried to disguise how close to death everyone in these rooms was dancing. Emma Hayes occupied a bed designed for adults, making her look impossibly small. IV lines ran into her arm. Monitors tracked vitals and glowing numbers that meant nothing to Jackson, but apparently satisfied the nurse who checked them every few minutes. The girl's eyes opened when he entered. Found him. Held. You stayed. I gave my word. Daddy said Marines are killers. We are. But we kill monsters so little girls can sleep safe. Am I going to die? No, ma'am. You're going to live, and you're going to be strong. How do you know? Because you walked into a clubhouse full of dangerous men to save yourself. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen brave men charge machine gun nests. The girl processed this, working it against whatever internal framework trauma had built. Will you be my daddy instead? The question landed like a mortar round, explosive and unavoidable. Jackson felt his throat close. Felt something behind his eyes burn the way it had burned exactly once before when they'd loaded his squad leader's body bag onto a Chinook, and he'd realized the man who'd kept him alive for 8 months wasn't going home in one piece. I can't be your daddy, sweetheart, but I can be something better. I can be your guardian, your protector, your battle buddy. What's that? In the Marines, your battle buddy never leaves you behind, never betrays you, never quits on you. I'm your battle buddy now, understood? The girl's voice came out smaller, younger, more fragile than anything Jackson had heard all day. Understood. Good. Now get some sleep. That's an order, recruit. She smiled. Small. Tentative? Real. Yes, sir. Jackson stood, his knee protesting, his back aching, his entire body a catalog of old injuries and older choices. He made it to the door before her voice stopped him. Semper Fi. He turned back. Semper Fi, Emma. The hallway stretched long and white and anonymous. Reeves leaned against the wall, coffee from the machine down the hall, steaming in a paper cup. National Brotherhood called Cole. Your charter's suspended, pending investigation. Jackson nodded. Expected that. Worth it. Worth it. Hayes is being held without bail. Trial in 90 days. Maybe less if the prosecutor pushes. Jackson's voice dropped into a register he'd learned in places where walls had ears and silence was survival. He better stay in protective custody. That a threat, that's a promise. Reeves didn't write it down, didn't acknowledge hearing it, just sipped his coffee and watched the hallway traffic. After a long moment, he spoke. Off the record, Marine to Marine, if something were to happen to Mr. Hayes in custody, I wouldn't work that case very hard. Jackson walked away. Cole and Miguel fell into step beside him. Three men who'd violated every code their club held sacred. Three men who'd do it again without hesitation. Three men heading back into a world that would judge them for their patches and their pasts and their refusal to let a child suffer when they had the power to stop it. The Phoenix night had cooled to a tolerable 98 degrees. Stars struggled against the light pollution. Traffic on Interstate 10 hummed with the eternal motion of a city that never slept because sleeping meant being vulnerable. Jackson's Harley started on the first kick. The engine rumbled, that deep throb of American steel and controlled explosions. He sat there for a moment, hands on the grips, eyes on the hospital entrance. Cole's voice carried over the engine noise. No going back now, never was. They rode into the darkness, three riders in formation, headed toward consequences they couldn't predict and a future they couldn't control. But somewhere in room 312, a girl named Emma Hayes slept without nightmares for the first time in 3 years. And that Jackson decided was worth whatever came next. The emergency church meeting convened 72 hours after Emma Hayes walked into the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse and walked out in an ambulance. Full chapter attendance, 28 members packed into a space designed for 15. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against body heat and tension thick enough to choke on. Wraith Donovan arrived at 6:37, 3 minutes late, which was theater. National Hells Angels representatives never showed up on time. Showing up on time meant you respected the people you were visiting. Showing up late meant you held power and everyone else accommodated. 55 years old, covered in ink that documented 30 years of brotherhood across 4 states and 2 prison systems. Army, not Marines. 2 tours in Iraq during the ugliest years, back when IEDs were turning Humvees into coffins and every pile of trash could explode. He'd lost his left eye to shrapnel in Fallujah and wore a patch that made him look like a cartoon villain, which was probably intentional. Wraith surveyed the assembled members with his remaining eye cataloging faces and body language and threat levels. His voice carried the gravel of a man who'd breathed too much smoke and shouted too many orders. You violated the first law. Code is absolute. National demands explanation or revocation of charter. Cole stood from his throne, the reinforced recliner creaking under his weight. The chapter president had dressed for this, wore his dress uniform complete with ribbons from Desert Storm. Psychological warfare, reminding everyone in the room he'd commanded Marines in combat while some of them were still learning to ride bicycles. We saved a child's life. You cooperated with police. That's betrayal. Jackson rose from his position against the back wall. The movement drew Wraith's attention like blood draws sharks. The 2 men studied each other across 15 feet of industrial warehouse space and 40 years of different wars fought under the same flag. You ever serve, Brother Army? 2 tours Iraq. And don't brother me until we settle this. Jackson's voice stayed level conversational, the tone that had preceded violence in 100 confrontations, where volume mattered less than certainty. Then you know some orders are unlawful, some codes are meant to be broken. Wraith's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his good eye, some memory surfacing against tactical discipline. National wants a vote. Support Jackson Cross or expel him. Those are the options. Charter stays or goes based on your decision. The room erupted. Miguel on his feet arguing that Ghost saved that kid. Tyler countering that breaking code sets precedent. What's next? Cooperating with ATF on weapons charges. Younger members looking to older ones for guidance. Prospects staying silent because prospects didn't get votes. A voice cut through the chaos. Hammer's 70 years old Vietnam veteran who'd been founding member of 3 different chapters before landing with Iron Brotherhood. White beard to his chest, prosthetic hand from a Viet Cong grenade in 1969. He stood with the deliberate movements of a man whose bones ached but whose will hadn't softened. I was at Hamburger Hill, watched boys die for bad orders, watched officers send men up that slope 11 times because command said take the hill. 470 casualties to capture ground we abandoned a month later. His voice carried the weight of 50 years processing trauma that never fully healed. Sometimes you gotta disobey to do what's right. Sometimes the order is wrong, and following it makes you complicit. That little girl didn't have time for us to worry about charter politics. The room settled, Hammer's words carrying authority that transcended patches and titles. He'd earned his opinion in places where earning anything meant surviving what killed others. Cole called the vote. Show of hands. Support Jackson Cross or expel him. No middle ground, no abstentions. Choose. 24 hands rose supporting Jackson. 4 members kept their hands down, not voting against but refusing to endorse code violation. 0 members voted for expulsion. Wraith watched the count with his single eye making calculations that showed on his scarred face like equations being worked in real time. He stood across the room with the measured pace of someone who'd cleared buildings room by room under fire, stopped 2 feet from Jackson. You're unified. That's unexpected. The chapter president's voice came from behind him, parade ground sharp. We're Marines, Army, Navy. We're brothers. We protect the innocent. That's our new code. Ray studied Jackson for 10 seconds that stretched like hours, then did something no one expected. Pulled him aside away from the chapter into the corner where old motorcycle parts gathered dust. His voice dropped below the range where others could hear. My niece was abused by her stepfather. 8 years old. System failed her. She killed herself at 16, hanged herself with an extension cord in her mother's garage while her mother was at work. Jackson's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. You did what I wish I'd done, what I should have done. But I followed the code instead of following what mattered. Wraith's remaining eye held pain that had nothing to do with the one he'd lost to Iraqi insurgents. I'll tell National you're suspended 6 months pending completion of community service. Keep your charter. Keep your colors. But you owe me. Jackson's voice stayed flat. Why? Because some things matter more than patches. And because I want to sleep one night without dreaming about that extension cord. The meeting dissolved into standard business. Treasurer's report. Upcoming runs. Maintenance schedule for the clubhouse septic system that kept backing up. The mundane machinery of any organization pretending normalcy while processing the reality that nothing would be normal again. Jackson left before the meeting officially adjourned. Rode straight to Phoenix Children's Hospital, where Emma Hayes had been transferred from ICU to the pediatric trauma wing. Room 408, this time window overlooking the parking lot, afternoon sun streaming through industrial blinds. The girl sat propped against pillows, coloring book open on the rolling tray table. Someone had brought crayons. She worked on a picture of a dog, brown and black, tongue hanging out. The tip of her own tongue poked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She looked up when Jackson entered. Something in her face had changed. Not healed, the healing would take years, but different. Less flat, more present. They're sending me to a foster home tomorrow. Jackson pulled the visitor chair close to the bed, sat with his bad knee extended, because bending it past 90 degrees made shrapnel grind against bone. You meet them yet? A lady came. Mrs. Morales. She's nice, but she has too many kids already. 74 cases, she said. She can't remember all the names. What else did she say? That I'm going to live with the Miller family. They have 5 other foster kids. 3 bedrooms, I'll share with 2 girls. How do you feel about that? Emma's crayon stopped mid-stroke. She stared at the half-finished dog. Scared. What if they're bad people too? What if Mrs. Morales doesn't check? What if they hurt me and nobody believes me again? Jackson wanted to promise her safety, wanted to guarantee the Millers were good people and the system would protect her this time. But Marines didn't make promises they couldn't keep, and Jackson had learned decades ago that lies in service of comfort still destroyed trust. Then you survive. You find a phone and you call me. Detective Reeves gave you my number. Emma nodded. You call, I come. That's the deal. Your battle buddy doesn't leave you behind. Even if it's the middle of the night, especially then. The Miller household occupied a rental in Glendale, 3 bedrooms split between 7 kids ranging from age 4 to 15. Tom and Susan Miller, both 40-something and well-meaning, had been fostering for 8 years. The house showed it crayon marks on walls that had been painted over multiple times, carpet worn thin in high-traffic areas, furniture chosen for durability over aesthetics. Emma arrived on a Thursday afternoon, caseworker, Patricia Morales, handling transport. The girl carried everything she owned in a trash bag, 3 changes of clothes donated by the hospital auxiliary, the coloring book from her room, a stuffed dog that one of the nurses had given her, brown and black like the one she'd been drawing. The other foster kids watched her arrival with the wary assessment of children who'd learned strangers meant change, and change usually meant bad. The oldest, a boy named Marcus, 14, and angry about everything, made a comment under his breath that Jackson didn't catch, but Emma's face registered. She shrank into herself, shoulders curling inward, eyes going flat again. Susan Miller did her best. Showed Emma her bed bottom bunk, shared room with 2 girls ages 6 and 9. Showed her the bathroom schedule, written on a laminated chart. Showed her where to put her trash bag of belongings in the communal closet. Explained dinner was at 6, homework at 7, lights out at 9. Emma nodded through all of it, speaking maybe 10 words total. Patricia Morales stayed for an hour doing intake paperwork and assessment, then left with promises to check in weekly. The front door closed behind her, and Emma was alone in a house full of strangers who'd seen too many strangers to invest emotional energy in one more. The first night, Emma didn't sleep. Lay in the bottom bunk staring at the underside of the mattress above her, listening to her roommates breathe and the house settle and sounds from the street that might be threats or might be nothing. At 3 a.m., she got up, checked the window locks, checked the bedroom door lock that didn't exist, wedged a chair under the doorknob the way she'd seen in movies. The second night, Marcus made another comment. Emma didn't tell Susan what he'd said, but her reaction told Jackson everything when he visited 2 days later. She'd regressed. Stopped speaking, except when directly asked questions. Stopped eating, except what was required to avoid attention. Stopped coloring. The school called on day 5. Emma had locked herself in the bathroom during second period and wouldn't come out. Teacher tried. Principal tried. School counselor tried. Finally, someone remembered the emergency contact listed on her file and called Jackson at 11:47 in the morning. He arrived in 23 minutes, violating multiple traffic laws and not caring. Found Emma still in the bathroom, door locked, small voice filtering through from the other side, saying she couldn't come out, couldn't go back to class, couldn't do this anymore. Jackson knocked once, identified himself, waited. The lock clicked. The door opened 6 inches. Emma's face appeared pale and terrified and holding together through sheer force of will. I can't go back there. Please don't make me. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jackson felt something in his chest crack with it. He looked at the school counselor, a young woman who probably meant well, but lacked the tactical experience to handle a child this traumatized. I'm taking her. Contact Mrs. Morales and tell her the Miller placement failed. The counselor opened her mouth to protest, probably about protocol and procedures and liability. Jackson's expression stopped her. The same expression that had convinced enemy combatants to surrender and fellow inmates to find somewhere else to be. Now, Patricia Morales arrived 30 minutes later, harried and exhausted, and managing too many cases with too few resources. She sat across from Jackson in the principal's office, while Emma waited outside with the secretary who'd given her hot chocolate and a magazine about horses. This placement isn't working. She needs specialized care. Mr. Cross, I have 400 children in the system. Emma's lucky to have any placement. The Millers are good people. The Millers are overwhelmed people. There's a difference. What do you suggest? I have no other available homes equipped for her trauma level. Jackson had spent the drive to the school thinking about this exact question, turning over options and resources and possibilities. The answer kept coming back to the same conclusion, insane as it sounded. What if we create one? Patricia's expression shifted from exhausted to skeptical. We, the club, we pool resources, rent a house, hire a caretaker, provide security, create a safe environment designed specifically for Emma's needs. You're a motorcycle club. You understand CPS would never approve. Jackson cut her off with the voice he'd used giving orders to young Marines who thought they knew better than their sergeant. We file as Veterans Organization. Iron Brotherhood Veterans Outreach, 501c3. We're already setting it up for our DV work. You approve us as group home sponsors. We handle the rest. That's insane. That's necessary. Patricia studied him for a long moment, making calculations about risk versus resources, regulations versus reality. Her voice came out, careful, testing the parameters. It would cost minimum $5,000 a month. Rent, utilities, caretaker, salary, food, medical copays, therapy. You understand that's not sustainable long term. We find a way. I'll take extra security gigs. We all will. Emma doesn't have time for us to worry about sustainable. The house in Tempe cost $2,200 a month, 3 bedrooms in a quiet neighborhood where the biggest crime was kids skateboarding past the no skateboarding signs. Cole signed the lease using the Veterans Outreach as legal entity. They moved in furniture, donated or purchased second-hand twin bed with purple comforter desk for homework bookshelf waiting to be filled. The caretaker answered an ad Miguel posted on veterans employment boards. Sarah Mitchell, 62, retired Army nurse, who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan treating casualties that would haunt her until she stopped breathing. Lost her husband to PTSD, driven suicide 5 years ago, found him in the garage with his service weapon and a note that said he was sorry, but the war wouldn't let him go. She interviewed on a Tuesday. Jackson, Cole, and Miguel, conducting it like a security clearance background check, because in some ways that's exactly what it was. Sarah answered every question with the calm competence of someone who triaged mass casualty events and knew that panic helped no one. Why do you want this job? Sarah's gray eyes held steady on Jackson's face. Because my husband needed someone who understood, and nobody was there, so he put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I won't let another person suffer alone if I can prevent it. You understand this kid's trauma is severe. Sexual abuse, physical torture, witnessed her mother's murder that was staged as overdose. She'll have nightmares, panic attacks, dissociative episodes. This isn't regular foster care. I spent 2 years in a field hospital watching 18-year-olds die from wounds that would have been survivable if we'd had better equipment or more time or less incoming. I can handle 1 8-year-old's nightmares. Jackson made the decision in his gut before his brain caught up. You're hired. Move in by Friday. We'll rotate guard duty. 8-hour shifts. Someone always present in the 3rd bedroom. Armed. Emma's safety isn't negotiable. Patricia Morales spent 17 regulations approving the arrangement. Put it on paper as temporary emergency placement pending permanent solution. Gave them 60 days to prove the concept worked, or Emma would go back into the standard foster system. Emma moved in on August 1st, 3 weeks after walking into the clubhouse. Sarah helped her unpack the trash bag of belongings, hanging the 3 outfits in the closet with careful spacing like they were a full wardrobe. The stuffed dog went on the bed, the coloring book on the desk, the purple comforter pulled tight with hospital corners because Sarah had been Army and Army made beds properly. The first night, Emma woke screaming at 2:17 a.m. Sarah reached her in seconds, turning on the lamp and sitting on the edge of the bed at careful distance. Not touching, just present. You're safe, you're in Tempe. Your name is Emma Hayes. The man who hurt you is in jail. Nobody here will hurt you. You're safe. She repeated the litany until Emma's breathing slowed, until the terror in her eyes faded to residual fear, to exhaustion, until she fell back asleep with the lamp still on because darkness was enemy territory. Jackson took the night shift sitting in the 3rd bedroom with his M1911 field stripped on the desk, cleaning each component in sequence while listening to the house breathe. Sarah had given him the baby monitor they'd installed in Emma's room, volume low but audible. He could hear her small sounds, the shift of blankets, the occasional whimper that didn't escalate to full nightmare. At 0600, he made coffee. Strong and black the way they'd made it in fire-based perimeter bunkers when staying awake meant staying alive. Sarah emerged from the master bedroom at 0615, already dressed, ready to begin the daily routine. How was she? 1 episode. Back asleep by 0230, otherwise stable. Sarah poured her own coffee, added cream and sugar, leaned against the counter. You don't have to use military time in civilian life, you know. Jackson's slight smile held no humor. I don't have civilian life. I have life. I'm living between wars. The days developed rhythm. Wake at 0600, breakfast at 0630. Emma emerged from her room cautious every morning, checking corners and sight lines before committing to the kitchen. Sarah made pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon that Emma initially wouldn't touch until she watched Jackson eat 3 pieces and realized food here wasn't punishment or scarcity. Tutoring from 0800 to noon. Emma tested 2 grade levels behind and reading 3 in math. Sarah had teaching credentials from her time running field hospital training programs. Patient, methodical, never raising her voice even when Emma's attention drifted to the window, checking for threats that didn't exist. Therapy at 1400 3 times a week. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, child psychologist specializing in complex trauma. Vietnamese-American 40-something, with the gentle persistence of someone who'd seen every variety of human damage and refused to be shocked. She worked with Emma using play therapy, art therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques that sounded like psychology textbooks, but boiled down to helping a child learn her brain's alarm system needed recalibration. Dinner at 1700. Emma helps Sarah cook, sometimes measuring ingredients with the precision of someone who'd learned that mistakes brought punishment. Sarah praised every measurement, every stirred pot, every task completed. Slowly, Emma's shoulders loosened. Slowly, her movements became less robotic. Bedtime routine at 2100. Bath first in the bathroom. Emma had claimed with a lock on the inside that she checked 17 times the first week and 12 times the second and 8 times by the third. Teeth brushed, purple pajamas with dogs on them that Sarah had bought, tucked in with the lamp on and the door open and the knowledge that someone was always in the next room. Jackson taught her chess on Saturday afternoons. Set up the board on the kitchen table with pieces scavenged from a thrift store. Explained how each piece moved, its strengths and limitations, its tactical value. War is chess with lives. You think 3 moves ahead. Anticipate your opponent. Protect your king, but don't be afraid to sacrifice lesser pieces if it achieves the objective. Emma absorbed this like gospel. Lost the first 12 games in under 20 moves. Started lasting 30 moves by week 3. Took Jackson to 52 moves in week 4 before he checkmated. You're learning. Good tactics. But you're thinking 2 moves ahead. Need to think 3. Her small voice carried determination that hadn't been there in the Miller house. Teach me. So he did. The trial date set for November 4th, 93 days after Emma's arrival at the clubhouse. Alicia Grant, the county prosecutor, visited the Tempe house in late September to prep Emma for testimony. Former JAG officer 42, with the controlled intensity of someone who'd prosecuted war criminals and refused to accept that American citizens could commit equivalent atrocities on domestic soil. She sat across from Emma at the kitchen table while Sarah made tea and Jackson maintained perimeter security from the 3rd bedroom. Grant's voice carried professional warmth calculated to build trust without condescension. Emma, I need you to tell a jury what your father did. I know that's scary, but your words will put him away so he can never hurt you or anyone else. Do I have to see him? No. You'll be in a different room with a camera. The jury will see you on a screen. He'll see you on a screen, but he can't reach you. And Mr. Cross will be in the courtroom the entire time. Emma's hands wrapped around her mug of hot chocolate, knuckles white. What if I freeze? What if I can't talk? Then we take a break. We go as slow as you need. There's no time limit on justice. Grant spent 3 hours that first session asking gentle questions about Emma's daily life with David Hayes, documenting the progression of abuse in clinical language that couldn't capture the reality but would satisfy legal requirements. Emma answered in fragments, voice small but steady, occasionally looking toward the doorway where she knew Jackson was listening. They met 6 more times over the next month. Mock testimony sessions where Grant played defense attorney, asked the kinds of questions Marcus Webb would ask, taught Emma that answering calmly mattered more than answering quickly. The final prep session occurred October 28th, 1 week before trial. Grant's expression had shifted from professional to personal, the mask dropping slightly. Emma, you're the bravest witness I've worked with, and I've worked with soldiers testifying about war crimes. You're 8 years old and you're stronger than men 3 times your age. Emma's voice came out quiet but firm. I'm not brave. I'm scared all the time. Grant leaned forward, elbows on the table, meeting Emma's eyes. Bravery isn't not being scared. Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway. You walked into a biker clubhouse to save yourself. That's the definition of courage. Jackson's voice filtered from the doorway. She's right, recruit. Fear is tactical data. Tells you the stakes are real. What you do with that fear determines who you are. The courtroom on November 4th packed beyond fire code capacity. Media in the overflow gallery. Victim advocates holding space for people who'd survived similar horror. Iron Brotherhood members filling 2 rows, 12 bikers in the cleanest clothes they owned. No colors because the club lawyer had been explicit about optics. Judge Patricia Coleman presided, 66 years old with silver hair, pulled back severe, and a reputation for harsh sentences in child abuse cases. Former prosecutor herself, 20 years on the bench, zero tolerance for anyone who claimed children lied about abuse. The jury filed in at 9:05. 8 women, 4 men. Alicia Grant had used her challenges to maximize mothers and fathers, people who'd look at Emma's testimony and think about their own children. Defense attorney Marcus Webb had tried to balance it with skeptics, but his options were limited in a case this obvious. David Hayes entered at 9:12, shackled at wrists and ankles, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on frame that had lost 20 pounds in county lockup. 4 months in general population had taught him what inmates thought of child abusers. His face carried healing bruises. His walk favored his left side where someone had kicked ribs hard enough to crack 3 of them. Jackson sat front row, dead center. When David's eyes swept the gallery and found him, Jackson didn't blink, didn't move, just stared with the expression that had preceded violence in 100 confrontations. David's gaze skittered away, settled on the floor, stayed there. Alicia Grant's opening statement lasted 17 minutes. Methodical presentation of facts, medical evidence, photographic evidence, witness testimony that would establish prolonged pattern of abuse. Her voice stayed level throughout, letting the horror speak for itself without theatrical embellishment. Marcus Webb's opening lasted 9 minutes. Reasonable doubt, circumstantial evidence. Child testimony unreliable. He didn't argue innocence couldn't with the medical evidence, just planted seeds that maybe it wasn't as bad as the prosecution claimed. Maybe Emma had been coached. Maybe the bikers had an agenda. The jury's expressions suggested the seeds fell on barren soil. Dr. Lisa Park testified first. Surgical details delivered in clinical language. Described the internal injuries, the healing fractures, the burn patterns that indicated deliberate torture. Cross-examination couldn't dent her credibility. Webb tried suggesting alternative causes for the injuries, and Dr. Park shut him down with the calm authority of someone who'd seen the real thing enough times to recognize it instantly. Rachel, the paramedic, followed. Described Emma's condition on arrival at the clubhouse. The blood, the bruises, the flat affect that indicated dissociation. Her voice cracked twice during testimony, and she didn't apologize for it. Detective Reeves took the stand at 1400, walked the jury through his investigation, the apartment conditions, the evidence collected, the prior CPS reports from California that had been dismissed or ignored, the financial records showing David had profited from his daughter's abuse. Webb's cross-examination attempted to suggest the bikers had staged evidence or contaminated the crime scene. Reeves's expression suggested he'd heard stupider theories but couldn't remember when. Jackson took the stand at 16:23, 40 minutes before Judge Coleman would recess for the day. Grant walked him through the events of July 16th. His testimony came out military, crisp, precise timing, and tactical details that painted picture without embellishment. Marcus Webb's cross-examination started aggressive. Mr. Cross, you're a convicted felon, correct? Yes, sir. Armed robbery, 1995, served 8 years. You've killed people in combat. Yes, FOBA confirmed enemy, kills Vietnam War. So violence is your answer to problems. Jackson's voice stayed level, but something in his eyes made Webb take half a step back. No, sir. Protecting innocence is my answer. Violence is sometimes the tool required for that protection. Webb pushed harder, sensing weakness that wasn't there. Isn't it true you wanted to kill my client? Yes, sir. The courtroom erupted. Judge Coleman's gavel cracked like rifle shot. Webb looked triumphant, thinking he'd scored points. Grant looked calm. She'd prepared Jackson for exactly this question. You admit to wanting to murder Mr. Hayes. Jackson's response came out flat, factual, devastating. I wanted to, I didn't, because I believe in the law, even when that law has failed before. But if the law fails Emma Hayes again, I won't, because some things matter more than my freedom or my life. That little girl's safety is one of them. The jury's expression shifted. Several members nodded. One woman in the back row wiped her eyes. Webb realized his mistake too late. Tried to recover. So you're threatening my client in open court. I'm promising the jury that Emma Hayes will never be hurt again while I'm breathing. And Marines don't die, easy, counselor. Judge Coleman should have admonished him. Instead, she looked at Webb. You open this door. Move along. The judge recessed at 1700. Jackson exited through the gallery gauntlet of reporters shouting questions he ignored. Found Emma and Sarah in the victim waiting area. Emma curled in Sarah's lap despite being 8 years old and Sarah's arthritic knees protesting the weight. The girl looked up when Jackson entered. Did you tell them I told them the truth? That's all any of us can do. Tomorrow it's my turn. Jackson knelt his bad knee protesting, bringing his face level with hers. You're going to do great. You're going to tell what happened, and then the jury's going to make sure your father never hurts anyone again. Promise, promise. The word hung between them. Sacred. Binding. The kind of promise that meant everything because the man making it had never broken one. Emma Hayes testified on November 6th at 9:47 in the morning. Not in the courtroom, but in a victim services room, 3 floors down, pink walls and soft lighting, designed to make children feel safe enough to speak. The camera setup looked like something from a television studio, 2 operators and a monitor showing what the jury would see. Sarah sat beside her, hand available if Emma needed it. But her Nguyen positioned herself just outside camera range, visible to Emma but not to the courtroom. Alicia Grant handled questioning via video link, her face appearing on a second monitor so Emma had someone to talk to instead of just a camera lens. Jackson watched from the front row of the courtroom gallery, staring at the large screen mounted where normally closing arguments would be projected. Emma's face filled the frame, small and pale and holding together through sheer force of will. Grant's voice filtered through speakers with slight audio delay that made the whole thing feel disconnected from reality. Emma, can you tell the jury your name? Emma Rose Hayes. How old are you? 8, almost 9. My birthday's in 3 weeks. Do you know why you're here today, to tell the truth about Daddy? The simplicity of that statement hit harder than elaborate explanation. A child reducing 3 years of hell to 5 words because children shouldn't need vocabulary for this kind of horror. Grant walked her through questions they'd practiced. Gentle, methodical, building the narrative one small piece at a time. Emma described her daily life with David Hayes in fragments that accumulated into devastating whole. The locked closet where she'd spend nights when he decided she'd been bad. The meals withheld as punishment for infractions she didn't understand. The cigarette burns delivered while he explained this hurt him more than it hurt her. The courtroom sat silent except for the audio system and the sound of people breathing, and one juror in the back row crying quietly into a tissue. Emma, did your father ever touch you in ways that hurt? Yes, ma'am. Can you tell the jury about that? Emma's voice dropped so low the audio technician had to boost levels. The jury leaned forward unconsciously, straining to hear. He said it was our secret, that if I told anyone bad things would happen. He said Mommy died because she couldn't keep secrets, and I didn't want to die like Mommy. The revelation landed like mortar fire. Grant's expression shifted, prosecutors' instincts, recognizing testimony that had just expanded beyond the charges filed. Emma, what do you mean about your mommy? She died when I was 5. Daddy said it was drugs. But he said other things too. When he was angry, said he had to make her go away because she found out about our secret. David Hayes stood so fast his chair crashed backward. Deputies converged before he'd taken 2 steps, forcing him back down while his attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgent instructions that Hayes ignored. She's lying. That little bitch is lying. Judge Coleman's gavel struck 3 times, each impact sharp enough to echo. Mr. Hayes, you will be silent or you will be removed. Bailiff, if he speaks again, take him to holding. The outburst accomplished what testimony alone couldn't. Showed the jury exactly who David Hayes was when his mask slipped. Several jurors looked at him with expressions that went beyond disgust into something colder. The look people reserve for things that need to be removed from society permanently. Grant recovered, smoothly redirecting Emma back to the original questions, but the damage, or rather the truth, had been established. David Hayes was more than child abuser. He was murderer, and his own daughter had just testified to it. Cross-examination lasted 9 minutes. Marcus Webb approached the microphone with visible reluctance, a defense attorney whose job required him to question a child, but whose conscience made it nearly impossible. Emma, the men at the clubhouse, did they tell you what to say today? No, sir. I told them what happened. They told me to tell the truth. That's what I'm doing. Are you sure these things happened? The way you remember, Emma lifted her shirt on camera, showing the jury scars that medical testimony had already documented. then held up her right-hand fingers, still bent wrong. These are real. He did this. I didn't imagine it. I didn't make it up. It happened. Webb ended there. No further questions. Sat down looking like he needed a shower and a different career. The jury deliberated 3 hours and 47 minutes, returned at 18:23 after dark after most courtrooms had emptied for the day. Judge Coleman reconvened with the speed of someone who'd been waiting for this verdict and wanted it recorded before midnight. The forewoman stood a middle-aged teacher from Scottsdale who'd sat front row and taken notes throughout the trial. We, the jury, find the defendant, David Hayes, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, victim advocates hugging each other, Iron Brotherhood members nodding silent satisfaction, media rushing to file updates. David Hayes slumped in his chair, face crumbling like a condemned building mid-demolition. Jackson felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the hollow recognition that justice delivered after trauma couldn't erase the trauma. Emma would carry scars that guilty verdicts couldn't heal. Sentencing hearing scheduled for November 20th, 2 weeks to let pre-sentence reports compile and victim impact statements prepare. Emma didn't write one too young, too traumatized, but Sarah Mitchell did, reading words Emma had dictated in pieces over several days. I used to think I was bad. That's why Daddy hurt me. Now I know he was bad. I'm just a kid. I want to be safe. I want to not be scared anymore. I want him to go away forever so other kids don't get hurt. The courtroom absorbed this with the weight it deserved. Several jurors who'd stayed for sentencing wiped their eyes. Judge Coleman's expression suggested she'd already made her decision before the hearing started. Jackson took the stand wearing full Marine Corps dress uniform ribbons from Vietnam displayed across his chest. He'd kept the uniform stored in a garment bag for 48 years, taking it out only for funerals of brothers who hadn't made it home alive. His statement lasted 4 minutes. Direct, unadorned, the way Marines delivered after-action reports. Your Honor, I'm not a good man. I've killed. I've stolen. I've hurt people. I served 8 years in prison for armed robbery. I don't stand here claiming virtue or redemption. But Emma Hayes is the bravest person I've ever encountered. She survived what most adults couldn't survive. She saved herself by walking into a room full of dangerous men because she had no other options. That should shame every system that failed her, every neighbor who heard her scream, every teacher who saw bruises and reported nothing. David Hayes doesn't deserve mercy. He showed Emma none. He showed her mother none. He deserves to die in prison knowing he destroyed the only people who ever loved him. That's not revenge. That's mathematics. Some equations only balance one way. Judge Coleman thanked him, dismissed him, turned to David Hayes, who'd been offered the chance to speak and declined through his attorney. Her voice carried the weight of the 20 years adjudicating human evil. Mr. Hayes, I've presided over 400 criminal cases. Murders, rapes, violence in every configuration. This case ranks among the worst. You exploited a child's dependence. You tortured her physically and psychologically. You murdered her mother and used that murder as threat to ensure silence. The depravity involved exceeds anything I can adequately express. 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, additional 25 years for each assault count to run concurrent. You will die in Arizona State Prison Complex, and the world will be safer for it. The gavel fell. David Hayes disappeared into the custody of corrections officers who handled him with the careful distance of people transporting something contaminated. The courtroom emptied slowly, people processing whether justice delivered felt like justice or just the least bad outcome available. Jackson's phone rang 3 days later. Unknown number, but the area code suggested official business. Warden Mike Sullivan from Arizona State Prison Complex in Yuma, voice carrying the professional neutrality of someone delivering information without editorial comment. Mr. Cross, I'm calling because David Hayes was attacked in general population this morning. 3 inmates all doing life sentences. He's in medical with fractured jaw, broken ribs, and severe facial trauma. He'll survive, but he's requesting protective custody. Jackson's response came out flat. Why are you telling me? Because Hayes claims he has information about Emma Hayes that you need to hear. Information about her mother's death. He'll only provide it in exchange for protective custody and isolation from general population. What information, he won't say. But Detective Reeves authorized a visitation slot for you tomorrow at 1000 hours if you're interested. I'm interested. The drive to Yuma took 3 hours through desert that looked like Mars without the romantic associations. Temperature dropped to 68 degrees, winter settling into southern Arizona with the subtlety of a hammer. Jackson rode alone, Cole having offered to come, and Jackson declining because some conversations required privacy. The prison squatted low and hostile against tan landscape razor wire, catching sunlight and throwing it back in aggressive glints. Maximum security. Concrete and steel housing. Arizona's worst criminals in conditions designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. Warden Sullivan met Jackson at processing. 50-something former Marine himself, once a Marine, always a Marine with the weathered face of someone who'd spent 30 years managing violent men. Hayes is scared. General population inmates don't tolerate child abusers. He won't last 6 months without protective custody. That's why he's talking. Self-preservation. What makes you think I care if he survives? I don't. But I think you care about the truth. And Hayes claims he's got truth worth trading for safety. The visitation room offered no comfort. Plexiglass barrier. Phones on both sides. Fluorescent lighting that made everyone look corpse pale. David Hayes appeared on the other side in prison blues, face swollen and discolored, one eye sealed shut, jaw wired together, forcing speech through clenched teeth. He picked up his phone with shaking hands. Jackson picked up his side without expression. "Thank you for coming." Jackson said nothing, just stared with the flat affect that had preceded violence in 100 confrontations. Let the silence work on Hayes the way silence worked on prisoners and enemy combatants who mistook quiet for weakness. "I need to tell you something about Anna, Emma's mother. The coroner's report said heroin overdose. It was heroin, but I gave it to her, forced the needle, held her down while she tried to fight, made it look like relapse." Jackson's grip on the phone tightened hard enough to make plastic creak, but his expression didn't change. "Why, she found out. About Emma, what I was doing. She threatened to call police, take Emma away, destroy my life. I couldn't let that happen. So I staged an overdose. Anna had history. Everyone believed it. You murdered her, then tortured her daughter using that murderous threat." Hayes's working eye held something that might have been shame if shame could exist in something this fundamentally broken. "Emma was 5. She found the body. I told her if she ever spoke to anyone, I'd make her death look like suicide, just like Mommy's accident. She believed me." Jackson stood. The conversation was over. Extraction of information complete. He moved to hang up the phone, but Hayes's voice filtered through, desperate and pathetic. "I'm telling you this because I need protective custody. If I testify, give full confession about Anna's murder, will you tell the DA to request isolation?" The question hung between them. Jackson could report this immediately, add murder charges, ensure David Hayes faced decades more of legal proceedings, or he could make a different choice. "I'll tell the DA about the murder." Hayes sagged with relief. "Thank you. I knew you'd—" Jackson's voice cut like razor wire. "But I'm not asking for protective custody. You stay in general population. What happens there is between you and God, and based on what you've done, I don't think he's on your side." He hung up the phone while Hayes screamed something inaudible behind the plexiglass, walked out through processing and security checkpoints, and into desert sunlight that felt clean after the prison's recycled air. Detective Reeves called that evening. Jackson provided the full statement about Anna Hayes' murder. Reeves's voice carried grim satisfaction. "We'll exhume the body, re-examine the evidence, add murder charges. He'll die in prison either way, but this ensures he dies with the full weight of what he did on the record." And protective custody, Detective Reeves didn't answer for 3 seconds that stretched like hours. "That's between Mr. Hayes and the warden. I've got no opinion on internal prison management." The call ended. Jackson sat on his porch watching traffic on the distant interstate and thought about the mathematics of justice. David Hayes would die in prison, whether quickly at inmates' hands or slowly from age and institutional decay didn't change the equation. Dead was dead. 5 years passed. Emma Hayes became Emma Anderson through legal adoption finalized in September 2021, 2 years after the trial. Sarah and Tom Anderson experienced foster parents who'd taken Emma after the Tempe group home proved temporary filed paperwork, making permanent what everyone already knew. Emma belonged with them. The adoption ceremony and family court felt like wedding and funeral combined, joy mixed with grief for the childhood that couldn't be recovered. Emma wore purple dress and braids courtesy of older sister Mia. Sarah and Tom stood beside her, looking nervous and proud and terrified they'd somehow fail this girl who'd already been failed by every adult who should have protected her. Judge Maria Santos, different from the criminal trial judge, asked the required questions with warmth that suggested she understood these proceedings meant more than paperwork. Emma, do you understand what adoption means? It means they're my forever family. And is this what you want? Yes, Your Honor. Very much. The gavel fell. Emma Rose Anderson official. Paperwork signed and sealed and filed in courthouse records that would follow her into adulthood. The gallery erupted in applause, Iron Brotherhood members filling 3 rows in violation of fire code. Sarah's extended family taking up another 2. Jackson sat back, row watching the girl who'd walked into his clubhouse 5 years ago transform into someone with legal family and permanent address in future that extended beyond survival. His eyes burned with something that wasn't tears because Marines didn't cry in public, but also wasn't not tears. Emma found him after the ceremony. 13 years old now, almost as tall as Sarah, wearing confidence that therapy, instability, and relentless love had built piece by piece. Thank you for coming, Uncle Jackson. The title had stuck. Uncle. Not father, that role belonged to Tom Anderson. Not grandfather, too formal for what they'd become to each other. Uncle worked. Uncle meant family without complications. Wouldn't miss it, recruit. She hugged him hard, this girl who'd been too traumatized to accept touch, now initiating it freely. Growth that measured in moments, not metrics. Jackson's cancer diagnosis came 7 months later. Agent Orange exposure catching up with him 53 years after Vietnam. The VA doctors delivered the news with clinical efficiency that couldn't disguise the grim statistics. Stage 3. Treatable but not curable. Maybe 2 years. Maybe 5 if he was lucky. And luck had never been Jackson's strong suit. He told Emma during their Saturday chess game 6 months into treatment that had stolen his hair and 20 pounds, but not yet his ability to think 3 moves ahead. The doctors say I'm sick. The cancer's growing despite the chemotherapy. Emma's hand stopped mid-move night, hovering above the board. Are you dying eventually? Not today, but the timeline's shorter than I'd hoped. She set the night down. Wrong, ignoring tactics for once. Her voice came out small, younger than 13. I don't want you to die. Jackson's scarred hand covered her smaller one, gently moving the knight to the correct square. Nobody wants to die, but Marines don't get to choose when we muster out. We just make sure we complete the mission first. What's your mission? Making sure you're okay, that you can protect yourself, that you know how to survive without me. I already know how to survive. You taught me, then I taught you well. Now I'm teaching you how to thrive. The Iron Brotherhood Veterans Outreach expanded beyond what any of them had imagined. The Emma Hayes case generated publicity that translated into donations, volunteers, and partnerships with legitimate social services organizations that normally wouldn't touch motorcycle clubs with 10-foot poles. They'd helped 387 domestic violence victims since 2019, provided temporary housing for 43 women and children fleeing abuse, coordinated with shelters across 5 states, became the underground railroad for people who'd exhausted official channels or feared official channels would fail them the way they'd failed Emma. Cole Mason ran an operations from the clubhouse that had been renovated and legitimized nonprofit status and board of directors that included former prosecutors and social workers, and even Detective Reeves, who'd retired from Phoenix PD and needed something meaningful to do with his civilian life. National Hells Angels still viewed them with suspicion, but couldn't argue with results. Some chapters started replicating the model. Others condemned it as going soft. The Iron Brotherhood didn't care about opinions. They cared about outcomes. Jackson's role shifted as his health deteriorated. Less fieldwork, more mentoring. Teaching younger members how to approach traumatized victims, how to build trust, how to recognize when someone needed protection versus when they needed space. The accumulated wisdom of a man who'd seen every flavor of human suffering and survived most of it. Emma visited every Saturday without fail, brought homework for him to help with chess games that she now won 60% of the time, updates about school and friends, and the tentative normalcy she'd built from wreckage. She decided on career path detective, like Frank Reeves, helping people who couldn't help themselves, breaking cycles of violence the way Jackson had broken hers. December 2024 brought phone call at 2:47 in the morning. Jackson's phone vibrating on the nightstand beside medications and symptom journals and the detritus of terminal illness managed at home because hospitals felt too much like dying. Emma's voice carried panic that training couldn't disguise. Uncle Jackson, I need help. His mind snapped alert despite exhaustion that went beyond physical. What's wrong, girl at school? Sophia Martinez, 12 years old, has bruises, flinches, won't make eye contact, wears long sleeves in Phoenix December, which means she's hiding something. You tell someone, school counselor. She said they'd monitor the situation. The phrase monitor the situation made Jackson's jaw lock. Monitoring had almost killed Emma. Monitoring meant waiting until damage became undeniable, which often meant waiting until damage became irreversible. What do you need? I need you to do what you did for me. Can the Brotherhood help? The old warrior's body protested standing, but his mind was already tactical planning, calling resources, assembling team, executing mission the way Marines had taught him 54 years ago. Give me her address, and Emma. You're coming with us. Silence for 2 beats. I'm 13. Too dangerous. You're 13, same age she is. She'll trust you. You taught me good tactics, use all assets. You're the best asset we have. Emma's voice shifted, carrying determination that hadn't been there when she was the scared 8-year-old walking into the clubhouse. I'll be ready. Come get me. Jackson called Cole, who called Miguel, who called Tyler, who called 3 other members, despite the hour. They assembled at the clubhouse by 0347 men, ranging from age 29 to 72, armed and ready for extraction operation that would violate multiple laws, and nobody cared, because Emma Anderson had learned from the best, and the best didn't let children suffer, while bureaucracy processed paperwork. They picked up Emma at 0400. She wore black pants and dark hoodie and carried herself like someone executing a mission. 13 years old and already more tactically sound than half the Marines Jackson had trained with. The address led to apartment complex in South Phoenix building that had seen better decades. Unit 2847, lights on inside despite the hour. Raised voices audible from the parking lot. Male shouting, female crying, child scream cutting through both. Jackson's hand moved to his hip, the M1911 holstered there after years of being prohibited from carrying. Cancer had a way of making legal consequences feel abstract. Cole called 911 from burner phone. Reported domestic disturbance. Hung up before they could ask questions. We go in, secure the child, hold until police arrive. Tyler, youngest and fastest, kicked the door. Cheap lock gave way on second impact. They flooded in with choreography learned in combat zones and executed in places where speed determined whether you saved lives or identified bodies. The stepfather, Juan Martinez, 38, drunk and furious, tried to fight. Tyler handled him with efficiency that would have impressed drill instructors' submission, hold that left Juan conscious but immobile on the floor. Miguel found Sophia locked in bedroom, 12 years old, and terrified bruises covering arms and legs and face. Emma pushed past the men, dropped to Sophia's level voice, steady despite adrenaline making her hands shake. I know you're scared. I was too. These men saved me 5 years ago. They're here to save you. Sophia stared at Emma, processing the similarity. Same age, same terror. But Emma carried something else now. Hope, strength, the proof that survival was possible. Show me your scars. Emma lifted her sleeves. Cigarette burn scars, faded but visible. Showed the fingers that still bent wrong. This is my past. It doesn't have to be your future. Sophia broke, grabbed Emma hard, cried into her shoulder while Emma held her, and remembered being held the same way by Sarah Mitchell and Detective Reeves and Jackson Cross. The chain of rescue passing forward. Police arrived 4 minutes later, different officers but same response. Shock at finding bikers protecting children. Recognition that sometimes the system needed unauthorized assists. Juan Martinez arrested Sophia, taken to Phoenix Children's Hospital, the cycle repeating, but this time with Emma Anderson as part of the rescue team instead of the one being rescued. Detective Chen Maria Chen, who'd replaced Reeves after his retirement, pulled Jackson aside while EMTs treated Sophia. This is the second time you've violated about 6 laws to save a child. I should arrest you, but you won't. No, because I read the Emma Hayes case file, saw what you did, saw what she became. If every vigilante had your track record, we'd have fewer cases. She handed Jackson her card. Next time, call me first. I'll expedite warrants, keep you legal. Jackson pocketed the card knowing there wouldn't be a next time. Not for him. The cancer was winning, stealing strength and time and whatever future he'd imagined existing beyond the next few months. But Emma Anderson would have next times, many of them. She'd join the force, work cases, save children the way she'd been saved. The legacy passing forward in ways that mattered more than DNA or legal documents. The hospital waiting room at 0600 felt like deja vu. Jackson in the same chair he'd occupied 5 years ago. Emma beside him instead of Miguel or Cole. Sophia Martinez in surgery instead of Emma Hayes. The pattern repeating because some cycles never fully broke, they just passed to people strong enough to disrupt them. Emma's voice came out quiet but firm. Thank you for coming, for helping her. Jackson's scarred hand found hers squeezed gently. Semper Fi, Emma, always faithful. I said I'd never leave you behind. That includes making sure you can do this without me when I'm gone. You're not dying yet, no, but soon. And I needed you to see this. Needed you to understand that saving Sophia wasn't about me. It was about you. You're ready to do this alone now. The words hung between them, truth that neither wanted to acknowledge but both recognized. The transfer of mission happening in hospital waiting room at dawn, one warrior passing responsibilities to another. Jackson Cross died on May 15, 2025, 72 years old in his bed at home because hospitals were for people who had hope of recovery. Sarah Mitchell and Emma Anderson sat vigil those final hours, one on each side holding his hands, while his breathing slowed and rattled and finally stopped at 14:23. Emma didn't cry. Not then. Marines don't cry on duty, and this was duty. Ensuring her battle buddy didn't die alone. Ensuring his last sight was people who loved him. Ensuring he knew the mission was complete. The funeral happened 6 days later at National Memorial Cemetery in Phoenix. Military honors. Flag-draped coffin. 21-gun salute echoing across manicured lawn that held too many warriors who'd survived wars only to lose battles with time or illness or memories that wouldn't fade. Iron Brotherhood turned out 47 members strong. Detective Chen in dress uniform. Warden Sullivan having driven from Yuma. Judge Coleman. Prosecutor Grant. Sarah Mitchell and Tom Anderson, and the entire Anderson family. Dr. Nguyen. 300 people whose lives Jackson Cross had touched over 72 years of hard living. Emma delivered the eulogy wearing black dress and Marine Corps pin Jackson had given her on her 13th birthday. Her voice carried across the gathering without microphone, strong and clear, and carrying certainty that came from speaking truth. Master Sergeant Jackson Cross was a warrior. He fought in Vietnam. He fought in prisons. He fought for me. People ask if he was a good man. I don't know if he was good, but I know he was necessary. He did what others wouldn't. He stood when others walked away. He taught me courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. I was terrified walking into that clubhouse. He was terrified breaking his code to help me. We were both terrified, but we both survived. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. Uncle Jackson, Semper Fi. Mission accomplished. You can rest now. The coffin descended into earth. Taps played mournful and final. The flag folded with crisp precision and presented to Emma, showing next of kin because legal family and actual family didn't always align, and the Marines understood the difference. Emma placed White Chess King on the coffin before they closed it. The piece from their Saturday games, the king she'd learned to protect while thinking 3 moves ahead. Jackson had taught her tactics became strategy, became survival. She'd teach that to others now. The gathering dispersed slowly, people returning to lives that would continue without Jackson Cross, but carry his influence forward in ways both visible and subtle. Emma stood beside the grave, longest Sarah eventually approaching and putting arm around her shoulders. You okay, sweetheart? Emma's response came out quiet but steady. I will be. He taught me how. They walked toward the parking lot together, daughter and mother leaving the old warrior to whatever peace awaited men who'd killed and saved and carried too much weight for too many years. 6 months later, Emma Anderson graduated from Camelback High School, age 16, having tested out of 2 grades through sheer determination. Applied to Arizona State University's criminology program with acceptance letter, arriving 3 weeks later. Full scholarship. First person in the Anderson family to attend university. She visited Jackson's grave every Saturday, chess piece placed on headstone each week. Different pieces. Building full set over time. Symbolic battlefield where the fallen warrior rested, knowing his battle buddy continued the fight. Sofia Martinez, the second girl rescued, thrived in foster care with a family that specialized in severe trauma cases. She and Emma became friends despite age difference, bonded by shared experience that civilians couldn't fully understand. Sofia talked about becoming social worker, breaking cycles from inside the system the way Emma was breaking them from outside. The Iron Brotherhood Veterans Outreach helped 617 domestic violence victims by end of 2025. Expanded into Nevada and New Mexico. Became modeled at other organizations, legitimate ones with government grants and board oversight, studied and replicated. Cole Mason retired as chapter president but stayed on as advisor. Miguel Santos took over leadership, younger and healthier, but carrying forward the mission Jackson had started. Tyler Reed ran the day-to-day operations, former punk kid transformed into competent administrator who could navigate nonprofit regulations and biker politics with equal skill. Detective Maria Chen became Emma's mentor, teaching her the practical realities of police work that university courses couldn't cover. Helped her apply to the police academy, wrote recommendation letter that detailed Emma's history without exploiting it, presenting her as asset rather than liability. The academy accepted her with conditional status pending psychological evaluation. Nguyen provided assessment that detailed Emma's trauma honestly, but concluded with clear recommendation. This applicant's history makes her uniquely qualified for Child Protective Services work. Her scars are credentials. Her survival is training. Emma Anderson graduated Phoenix Police Academy in 2030, 19 years old, youngest in her class by 2 years. Made detective by 2033. Ran Child Protective Unit by 2035. Her closure rate on child abuse cases became legendary. Victims talked to her when they wouldn't talk to anyone else because she understood in ways that couldn't be taught. She kept the white chess king from Jackson's funeral on her desk at the precinct. Reminder of tactics and strategy and thinking 3 moves ahead. Reminder that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Reminder that one person answering the door when a terrified child knocked could change everything. The Iron Brotherhood continued. The mission expanded. The cycles broke more often than they perpetuated. And somewhere in the Phoenix heat in the desert that had witnessed too much violence and just enough redemption, the memory of Jackson Cross lived on through every child saved, every victim, protected every person who chose to stand when standing was the hardest thing imaginable. Some doors close, some doors open. And some warriors never stop standing guard, even after they've been laid to rest beneath desert soil and military headstones that mark lives measured in service rather than years. Emma Anderson understood this, carried it forward, became what Jackson had made possible through one decision on 114-degree afternoon when an 8-year-old girl with nowhere else to go had walked into a clubhouse full of dangerous men and found exactly what she needed. Not safety, not shelter, not even love, though that came later. She'd found someone who answered the door, and that made all the difference.